Welcome back. Where is all this bad weather coming from? Studies revealed that global warming is forcing ocean temperatures to rise, and this in turn is causing storms to intensify. According to America's weather watchdog NOAA, this will only get worse as we get towards the end of the 21st century. And global warming is also raising sea levels, so when a tropical cyclone comes along, the vulnerability to flooding drastically increases. Still with us from Denver and Colorado, Kathleen Jane Tierney in London, Katrine Brehik, and on the line from Muscat in Oman, Philip Berdrand. Katrine in London, in your writing for the New Scientist magazine, do you find constantly that we're referring to natural disasters in quotes because so much of it is now man-made because of the way that we've changed the landscape?
I wouldn't say we refer to them in quotes. Natural disasters have always happened and would continue to happen even if we stopped pumping CO2 into the atmosphere today. There's no real question, as Kathleen said earlier, that we are affecting the occurrence of those events, but we're not switching them on or switching them off. We're changing their strength and we're changing the frequency at which they happen.
But we're also
so I wouldn't say that we could put.
Are we not also changing the natural environment, as Kathleen was suggesting? The wetlands are going, sea defences like barrier reefs and so on are also disappearing?
There's absolutely no doubt about that, and there's no doubt that we, in adapting our own lifestyles, have basically put ourselves at greater risk.
So Philip Berdrand, listening to this as a man whose job is specialising in computer software that helps people deal with disasters, unfair to say this is boom time for you?
Well, our technology can apply to a number of different areas, but I mean, I think the key has come through from the other speakers is that you've got to have to be prepared. So organisations should be collecting information about the different facilities they need to, like the hospitals and the points where they can locate landing sites, means of evacuating people from disaster areas in a quick means. This all needs to be pre-known. And only then, when you've gone through and actually are in a disaster situation, is to get the people out effectively. There's also the communication that has to occur. So our technology, it's basically able to collect the information and put it in a map form that is then can be put out very quickly to a lot of people, and you get a lot of information going out on a map. And I think that's the key, is getting information out to the resources that need it.
Katrine, back to you in London. As we take a look at the River Thames behind you there, is there a possibility that cities such as London, which haven't flooded in many years, if at all, could now do so because of the change in the environment, the way that the world is changing, temperatures rising, sea levels going up?
Yeah, and London, I think, is preparing, as we've all said, for that. There's debate as to how fast sea levels will rise. That's a debate that's sort of raging at the moment, but I think in the past few years, climate scientists have begun to agree more and more that sea levels could rise much faster than we've been prepared for it in the past, and that we need to expect possibly for as much as 1 metre of our coast to disappear by the end of the century. And as we've said already on the programme, the 1 metre rise doesn't just affect that 1 metre that's above current sea levels. It affects a huge portion of the population inland of that because of storm surges.
So what are the priorities from your point of view?
What are the priorities in terms of preparing for that? I think Kathleen made a very good point in mentioning both adaptation and mitigation. I'd say that the problem at the moment is that governments don't have necessarily the long-term vision that they need to address the situation. That could be because their terms in office are simply not as long as is needed in order to think about climate change. This is an issue which is not something that can be addressed over 4 years. We need 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years to address it, or even more. And at the moment, the vision that we have is very short term. So I think we need to be doing that short term adaptation. We also need to be looking towards limiting our CO2 emissions or even dropping them entirely.
I mean, something like Katrina, something like Gustav, would you say they came because of the way that the man has mucked up the planet?
No, I think that's a very difficult statement to make. It's a tempting statement because we are seeing these changes in our environment and we are seeing an increase in natural disasters. But climate scientists, I think, would agree when I say that you can't pinpoint any single event to climate change. You can't say that Shell has been pumping out so many tons of CO2 into the atmosphere and therefore Shell is responsible for Katrina. There's not, at the moment, we can really only correlate climate change with trends in our climate. And the only study that I know that's actually pinpointed the role that man has played in triggering a natural disaster, which was a study that was published a few years ago and that looked at the 2003 heat wave in Europe, which had disastrous effects. And what they did was they did a modeling study where they compared a world with man-made CO2 emissions and a world without man-made CO2 emissions and tried to see what the likelihood, what the probability of the 2003 heat wave happening was in both of those scenarios. And they found that with man-made CO2 emissions, the likelihood of there being a disastrous heat wave in 2003, such as there was, more than doubled, in fact. And so you can't say that that heat wave happened because of man-made emissions, but you can say that we made it more likely to happen.
Kathleen Tierney in Denver, Colorado from the Natural Hazards Center. Katrine makes the point that it's not necessarily politically expedient in the short term for a politician to decide to invest money and energy in sorting out climate change. What's your view of how seriously these things are taken?
They tend to be taken quite seriously after a major disaster event and less seriously as we move forward in time from that event. I think Katrine has called attention to something very important, which is that the time horizon of many decision makers is far shorter than the kind of time horizon needed to put in place adaptive and mitigative strategies to protect us not only from the consequences of climate change, but also from the consequences of disasters. This is a key issue. It's a key problem. There is a very pressing need for groups of people to come along who have the political will to take on these very long-term challenges, which the longer we delay, the less time that we'll have to deal with them.
You also need a great deal of money, don't you?
Yes, but we have to weigh that investment against the costs of doing nothing. And we also have to recognize that our efforts to adapt to climate change and to the threats presented by natural hazards also present opportunities for new markets to develop.
Now let's go back to Katrine Brayhick waiting for us in London. I mean, the financial implications of this are pretty obvious. If you're going to be prepared for everything, it's a bottomless pit, isn't it?
It is, but there's a number of reports in the past few years that have pointed out that it could be even more costly, particularly in human terms, if we don't prepare and if we don't mitigate our CO2 emissions. So I don't think in the end the economic argument weighs out really, and in fact I think it's in a sense the financial argument that's going to win this battle, because there's a number of companies which have realized already that they have a financial interest in preparing for climate change.
Yeah, but I mean, does the same logic apply in Bangladesh or in Bihar, where at the moment we're seeing a massive natural disaster? That same logic apply there as it does in Louisiana?
The situation there is very different. I think the people of Bangladesh are unfortunately victims in this situation. They have not produced the CO2 emissions that are affecting their environment at the moment, and I do think that there's a moral responsibility on the part of the West to address the consequences of their actions, not just at home, but around the world as well.
Thank you everybody for joining us. The very best of luck in all of your work. I'm sure there's not a single person watching this programme who would wish to be in the same situation as those people either in Bangladesh, Bihar or in Louisiana. Kathleen Tierney in Denver, thank you very much. Katrine Brayhick in London from New Scientist magazine.
Thank you, David.
And Philip Bergeron on the phone from Muscat in Oman. Thank you too, and thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story from me, David Foster, and from the rest of the team. Goodbye.